Hello, everyone. This is George Roberts, and welcome to our March 9 Tech Talk on support and resistance lines and the charting indicator. The webinar is being recorded, and it'll be available to registered attendees. It takes a couple of hours for me to get that all ready and load it up, so usually later in the evening, sometime early morning, you'll have it, but you'll get a link, an email to it. Is everybody hearing us okay now? So it's the same protocol as we followed the last time. Matthew will go first, giving you a technical presentation on this indicator. And that'll be followed by Ron, then showing you how it works as an application in the investing world. And then there's a 30-minute or so Q&A. Now, many of you put in an awful lot of questions and comments. We're going to save those until the very end so that we have them packaged in one place. We may not be able to get to all of the comments that you passed in, but thank you very much for taking the time to do that. So Matthew, at this point, it's all yours.
Okay. This week we're going to talk about the VPA Support and Resistance indicator. Just like last week, I'm going to do it live. I actually have built these views before, but I want to show you guys how to do it. So I'm in the charting here, and I bring up our create views, and I'm going to make a new view, and I'm going to actually put the support and resistance on. And so it's basically an indicator, and you can find it if you look down through here. We have a category for the volume price analysis indicators, but you know, scrolling all the way down and getting it is a lot of work, and it's a lot easier to just type a search word and it'll filter down to what's available. So the VPA support and resistance, it actually doesn't have a lot of VPA to it. It's really just a support and resistance indicator, but it's, you know, in this class of family of indicators, so that's why the title's there. So this is the basic option panel for the support and resistance, and you basically tell it how many lines you want it to compute, and I'm going to talk about how it computes in a second. But the number of lines is actually the number of line pairs, and so so when you say the default setting is 5, and so that'll produce 10 lines on the chart, and 10 lines is a little much. So as a rule, I recommend you lower this number if you're building your own. The sensitivity option controls the Zig Zag indicator that this is based off of, and this is there's a handout that in this seminar that you can download. You should have a handout section, and it shows, it's going to cover the same thing I'm covering, but it has much more detail on the Zig Zag indicator. But anyway, the Zig Zag indicator has a parameter which is the percent changed in order for it to change the direction, and this is the sensitivity that's in the support and resistance indicator. And then there are two settings for the lines, to what to color the support lines and resistance lines. So I'm going to stick this on here with the base sensitivity, but I'm going to lower the lines to 3. And then I'm going to, and then this is basically a basic chart. And so what you've got here is, this is Google, and I said 3 lines, so there should be 6 lines on the chart. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you got to watch it with your crosshair sometimes. It's hard to sometimes see these lines. Now, the first thing you will notice when you're using this indicator is that the coloring doesn't seem to match what you would think it should, and this is because the coloring is relative to the very last bar in the chart. And so the close here, any lines above the close are colored in the resistance color, and any lines below the last close are colored in the support color, because support and resistance lines, they change what they mean depending on where the stock price is. a resistance line becomes support once the stock gets above it, and a support line becomes resistance once a stock falls below it. And so these lines, when they were computed, they may have been support lines, but as the stock's prices moved, the meaning of the lines change. And for this indicator, the color is always based on the last close. The way this works, the way this is computed is there are two zigzag indicators that are used to compute the levels of these support and resistance lines. And the zigzag indicator, it's a charting indicator we also have that you can use just as a regular charting indicator. When you add it to the thing, the support and resistance indicator uses zigzag on the high and the low values as opposed to the close or open. In the zigzag indicator, you can pick which fields to use. So in order to simulate how the support and resistance indicator computes its lines, you have to switch to the high and low, and then the percentage is the sensitivity in the support and resistance. So the default in the zigzag indicator is 10, but the support and resistance uses 6. And I'm going to make this a dotted line because I think it makes it a little easier. And so the resistance lines are the high. So I'm going to change that to red, and then and so you get this chart, and you'll notice right away that those support and resistance lines were coming off of these points, and that's how they're computed. The support lines are computed off the troughs on the low, and the resistance lines are the peaks on the high. And so here's the first peak on the high, and the second peak, and the third peak. And basically the indicator takes the highs, the high peaks, for as many back as you said to make lines. So if you said 3 lines, it'll take the 3 peaks. And then support lines, there's another version of this. So I'm going to just duplicate this. And I will change the parameters. Change the color here to blue, and change this to the low, and this indicator will show the other set, and then it takes the troughs. Now, one thing you have to remember, the zigzag, it computes points of change when the price changes more than the percentage setting in the zigzag indicator. And so the zigzag indicator changes previous values based on future stock prices. So the zigzag changes every single day. So this zigzag line that we see here, that it troughs out, it bottoms out here in September, and it comes up to here. This line, if we went back in time to one of these days in here, this line would look different. It changes, the zigzag changes every day, and so you can't back test the zigzag indicator because it recomputes what the line is every single day up until the point actually changes completely. And so you can't actually back test the zigzag, and as a result of the support and resistance indicator using the zigzag, you can't back test the support and resistance lines either. They're only valid now. They would not have existed in the past, and so you can't really use them as a guide to whether or not you should have entered a stock, say, a month ago. But they are valid now, and they show you where the support and resistance lines are because they pivot on these zigzag lines, which are inflection points in the stock price changing. Let's make one more view. So anyway, the indicator, the support and resistance line, indicator, it uses 2 zigzags to compute the lines, and so I'm going to now add the zigzag to this. I'm going to add the 2 zigzags so that you can see. And so the zigzag on the high at 6, and those are resistance lines, and the zigzag on the low also at 6. So here's the full Monty, as it were. So the zigzag determines the support lines and resistance lines, but you have to remember that the color of the line is going to be based on the last close, but the color of the line, the reason why the line exists is actually based on whether it was coming off of the high zigzag or the low zigzag. And so if you look at this kind of a chart with some stocks, you'll notice, like, well, in this case, the line is blue, but it really was a resistance line back here on this day when it pivoted. The line was computed as resistance, but because the stock has moved well above it, it is now being drawn in blue, even though this line, the pivot that defined this line was really a resistance line. And then, so on this indicator, one of the interesting things that not a lot of people realize is that the support and resistance lines have a lot of data in the data window, and the zigzag also has a lot of data in the data window. If you look at this view, I'm going to go back to the one without the zigzags. So you can see in the data window, you can see whether they were support or resistance lines, even though today only 2 of these lines are still resistance, but 3 were computed as resistance off the zigzag. And so you get this, it can be a little confusing. You just kind of have to accept that the lines have a reason for being there. Now, the data window also has a lot of other data. It'll tell you when you're approaching numbers, and so those can be really useful on the last close. You know, it's not near any of these support or resistance lines, but on days when it's approaching resistance lines, the data window will tell you about that, so that you know when it's close to a line. And the details of what it'll do on that is in that PDF that came with it. Let's see. And then one other feature that's not really obvious about this support and resistance indicator is that it has a data report. And so if you there's a right click, and there's also this button, and you can bring up a report where it will make an HTML file with the data, with what the values of the support and resistance lines are, and it saves that HTML file on your hard drive somewhere. You can I save my stuff in the reports folder, but you can put it anywhere. But this can be kind of useful if you want to record these values and have them as a reference in the future. This is the pivot day that defined the resistance or support and what the value was, and they can be useful for record keeping kind of process. And it's not obvious that we can make those little reports. And I think that's all of how this indicator technically works. I think hand it over to Ron now. No, I think that's all of it.
Matt, on that HTML report, could you just copy and paste that into a spreadsheet?
You could, and you can also open the HTML in Excel if you'd like. I mean, obviously it opens in, it will open in Excel. And you can also copy and paste the values into a spreadsheet or anywhere else. I mean, it's an easy way of getting the data in a form you can get out of, and that's something that maybe hasn't always been clear. We have this report feature. It's called Create Indicator Report, and it only will become live if one of the indicators in the current view has a report feature. And out of our indicators, only a small handful of them have report features. Mm-hmm. The Support and Resistance has a report feature. The VPA has a report feature. And it makes these HTML files with all the data from the session that the stock you're looking at, and each report format is specific to the kind of indicator. And the Support and Resistance data report, if you up the number of lines, you'll get a whole lot more data in this window, and you can copy and paste these into a spreadsheet. This HTML file will open in Excel like this exactly. Although I think copying and pasting is probably more useful as far as this goes. The lines, it doesn't. These reports aren't generated automatically. You have to do it yourself, and so you might want to, when you make the report, stick a date on it, because the report itself doesn't actually have a date when it was created. And so those resistance lines have dates, but those are the pivot points where the line actually draws back to the date you actually generated the report, today, essentially. And so if you're keeping a record of those, but those can give you, it's a way of getting the number out of the indicator so that you could then use that as a stop, or
sure,
some sort of trading thing. You could also use it as an entry point, when you place an order in, use it, a copy and paste of that value without having to type it manually. I don't know if that's practical, to be honest, but there you go.
Well, thanks, Matt. That was great.
Okay, so let's...
I cleared up, a lot of stuff, I think.
A lot of little details.
Okay, I just want to point some things out. I'm going to do this on the fly, and we'll see what we can come up with. For those of you, while you all have the VPA add-on dated 2016 February 13th, and if you do, well, if you don't, you should have it, but I'm assuming you do. And there are several support and resistance charts in here already. I just built them, and they're really just starting points. But as you can see, let me put Goog up here. Did you have Goog or Google? Actually, I'm going to use Apple. And there are a variety of different sensitivities here. But what I want to do is I want to go ahead and build a chart just like Matthew did. So I'm going to go into my Choose Create View, and I'll create a new view. I'll just call this Demo. And I'm going to put 10 extra periods on the chart. I didn't want 101, I wanted 10. Okay, and then I will close that. I'll just go ahead and open this blank chart, and then we'll start building on this chart. Now this is a base chart, as you can see, and I'm going to go in and edit the view. I'll double click on price. I'm going to leave it a single color, and I'm going to widen the bar, and I'm going to leave it as a bar chart for right now. And if I were using multicolors, it would be computed from last close to current close, but since I'm using a single color, that's irrelevant right now. And then on the volume, I'm going to use a single color, the same thing, and once again, I will widen that bar, and let's see how that changed it. Now, it's much more readable with the wider bars, and this is just a naked chart. pretty much. And I'm going to start putting some support and resistance lines in here. So I'm going to, I'll go back up here and I'll just double click on it here. And I'm going to add an indicator. And like Matt said, you can search for it, but I usually just type VPA in here. And then it will take me down to the support and resistance lines. And I'll say OK. And then I'm going to change the sensitivity. I'm going to use 3 lines with only 2 sensitivity to begin with. That means it only needs a 2 percentage point move for the pivot. And I'm going to just go with the default colors on this one. And I'll call this, so I'm reminded, I'm just going to call this 3 and 2. Very simple. And let's take a look at that. And you can see that there are 6 horizontal lines drawn, and these are pretty close together here. It just means that with the lessened sensitivity of only 2%, that I'm looking at this on a short-term basis. I'm looking for shorter-term support and resistance lines because they're going to draw quicker with the low percentage change requirement. Next, I'm going to go in here and add some more support and resistance lines. This time, though, I'm going to lengthen. I'm going to leave it at 6 this time, which is the default, and I will go with 3 this time, but this time I'm going to change colors. And the reason I'm doing this is that I want to differentiate the long-term support from the short-term support. So I'm going to use a green for the support line color, and I'll just use this reddish brown for the longer-term resistance. And I need to label these. So I'm doing 3 and 6. And then now this gives me both long-term and short-term support and resistance lines. If I bring up my information window by using the alternate I keys, you can see what Matt was talking about here. Now, the reason I named it 3 and 2 and 3 and 6 is because I can immediately tell which are the longer term and the shorter term support and resistance points. These up here, and let me see if I can draw my screen here. I'll make this a frame. These are all the shorter term, and these will be the longer term. Now this is something I just started experimenting with today. In the past, I've always just used one sensitivity, but I think this will work pretty well if you think about it in terms of both long and short-term support. So if I bring this back up and come over here to the last day, notice when I go over here in this area, see where my mouse is, it's only giving me these support and resistance over here where there are 4 of them. Now when I come over here and I'll put my crosshair on, you can see that all of the support and resistance areas are in the information box right here. So I know, like I said earlier, both long and short-term support. Now what can we use these long and short-term support and resistance lines for? Well, a few things just off the top of my head, or things I've thought about today, is we know exactly where short-term resistance is on Apple, and that would be on this red line right here. In fact, it's approaching that. Let me bring an arrow up here. It's approaching resistance at 103.75, which would be right here. So you don't have to come over here and try to figure out where you are, where it's heading. It's the precise number, and it's right here in the information window. Now, where is the closest support? It would be obviously below the closing price, and that support looks like it's around 99. So I would be not looking at the longer term, because this is short-term support, and it says resistance, but it's actually support. Matt, correct me on this if I'm wrong. These are going to be red over here because they were originally, they're resistance lines, but because of where the price is in the short-term support, this is the only red line, but this is the line that it's referring to right here at 98.89. A little bit confusing. I mean,
yeah,
you can see.
the data window tells you what the line's original purpose was, but what it's meaning today is the color of the indicator. And yeah, it does create this kind of confusion, because the support and resistance change based on whether or not you're looking at where the close is today relative to the line. But the data window tells you what its original purpose was. Mm-hmm. It was, okay. And so you can get this mix. It can create some. You have to think about it a little differently to make it work. And maybe we might want to think about changing that a little bit to make it so that it's not quite as confusing. But the problem is that when you look in the past, what it really meant wouldn't be the same as the current close. It's one of those things. It's how it works.
Well, that's fine. I mean, I like it, and I think it's very useful. I mean, you get you get some good visuals here of support and resistance without taking the time to draw them by hand. So it's a really good tool, I think. So if we look up here, if it breaks past this short-term resistance around this 104 level with these long-term lines in here too, it is showing a long-term area. Now, actually, you know, there would be some resistance in here, and I could probably pick that up if I added more lines. Just out of curiosity, let's try it. Edit indicator, and I'll go down here to the 3 and 6, and let's just change this to 4 and see what happens. And well, it picked, okay, it's considering this here the resistance based upon the zigzag. But yeah, that's what I was looking for right in there, wasn't it? Somewhere in there. Okay, so by adding more lines, you can pick up more support and resistance points. I'm going to go back and change that just to keep the number of lines off of here or down. So I'll change that back to 3. And let's talk a little bit about what we can use these for. Well, I mentioned earlier that we know that this is short-term resistance right in this area. But let's say you're thinking about either a long or a short position in Apple. And I'm going to zoom in on here by hitting my alternate. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. I've got my Camtasia, my hotkeys all screwed up, so I'm just going to zoom in like this. Go back to the old way, Matt. Okay, so let's say that you're thinking about a long position in Apple, and you're kind of here in no man's land right now, but you're thinking if it holds above this support line, and I'm going to click over here on the trend line, and I'm going to draw a line from, let me make it a black line, from today's close. By the way, this is intraday data. And if you hold your shift key while you're drawing down, it will go straight down vertically. So let's say you want to risk this down just below this support area. So I'm going to release that. And if you look down here at the bottom, that's only a 2.4% risk on this trade. But the reason I selected that is that here's the closing price here. Right there, there's today's close. And it's pulling back on light volume right now, and it looks like it's gaining some support. You should have used a different color than black now that I look at this, because it's confusing. There's the close, pulling back on light volume, and if this market holds up, it looks like Apple has a decent chance to go higher. And if you're willing to risk 2.3%, this is how you can easily figure that out. Let me do that again.
So, Ron, just before you do that, if you pick the no.
I want to change the color.
Well, yeah, no, I wanted to show how you can change the color of a line you've already drawn.
Oh, okay.
Because you can now do that. So redraw the bad color, and because you can now change the color lines. You couldn't do this before, and
that's right.
So I thought this would be an interesting teaching moment. So pick the arrow key in the annotation, and then it'll select the thing, and then if you pick another color, it'll change the line.
Did you see how I did that?
So you don't have to actually redraw lines to change their colors.
Yeah, I've been around this so long, Matt.
So long, you got so used to not being able to do that you would delete the line and redraw it automatically. But now you can actually change. You can edit the line itself. You can move the whole line. So show them how to move the line.
Okay.
So like perhaps they wanted to make it a little longer down towards more. Yes. And then if you hold the shift, it'll lock on the 90-degree marks.
I'm holding the shift key and dragging it up and down right now.
It's we've made a bunch of improvements towards the end of last year on the annotation tools. So if you haven't used them in a little while, it's definitely much better. You don't have to redraw lines to change their color. And you can also change their type too, so you could make it dotted or another kind of line if you'd like as well. Okay.
Now, thanks for reminding me of that, because I forgot all about that, to tell you the truth. Okay, now I've got the line in here. Now I'm risking 4.5%, and that number would be 96.46. So all that information would be right here if you wanted to use this to set up your risk reward. And as a lot of you know, I like to use this Tony Oz calculator, and let's just do this quickly. Let's say you have, I know a lot of you guys have a lot more money than this, but I'm just going to use this number. And the end number is 96.46. The closing price, I don't have it on here, do I? Let's see, it closed about $101 approximately. And let's see, what did I see for the stop loss? Oh, now I screwed it up, didn't I? Let's do this. That's going to stay on top, and I'm going to delete this, and now I have my line back. So 97.41. And I would have to get the average volume. I don't have a volume number on here. I should have put all that. I should have put the moving average in here. And I don't have the ATR in here anyway. But just as an example, this is how you could use this to figure out how much risk you want on a stock, or if you want to take this line in the other direction, if it gets up to a certain point, you could say, I'll settle for that, and you can just figure that all out. And that point would be this resistance line up here of maybe 104. That's not much of a trade, but if you're into it for a short-term trade and you're doing a short-term debit spread or trading options or whatever, that would be a pretty decent trade. So that's one of the things that you can use this support and resistance for. Now let's go ahead and build on this chart a little bit. What I'm going to do next is, since we're talking about VPA, let's just bring VPA into the equation. So I'm going to edit the current view, and in this price window, I'm going to take the label off. I'm going to add an indicator, and I'll do the VPA. And I'll put the flags on here and display it in the upper corner. So by adding the VPA to the support and resistance lines, we can use these tools in a combination. So you can see right down here, when Apple was getting a lot of support with, by the way, these are the longer term support lines here, the green lines, but this would be a shorter term line right here, the blue line. Shorter term and longer term, they're right here together combined. But you can see that during this consolidation period, look at all these flags which were suggesting that this stock, Apple, is basing or building a cause right through here. You can see, and then finally what happened is it broke past this short-term trend line at that point. Let me clean that up. So it broke past right here, and it broke past on heavy volume. Here's the volume line for this, and that is an effort to rise signal. So we can use these trend lines in conjunction or in combination with the VPA flags. Now, as you've heard me say before, I'm trying to steer away from just calling them signals because they're not all signals. What they are alerts to alert us to when potential trades may be setting up based upon the activity of the stock. This one right here, for example, you can see there are two signals, strength coming back in and stopping volume, and you can clearly see the stopping volume. What's valuable to me about these VPA alerts is that it allows me to see things that I really never looked at closely in the past. And what it does is it gives you confidence to potentially take trades that you may not have even considered before. This is a low-risk trade. I mean, yeah, Apple was going down. We know that. But when it gets down here and it starts basing and you start getting these flags up here, and you can always look up here and see what the flags mean, this is a low-risk trade. It's not a high-risk trade. Now let's do something else. Another thing I want to talk about, we haven't talked about this much, is when you start looking at these VPA signals and support and resistance lines, you also need to start looking at longer-term charts. You need to start looking at the weekly charts, and you can even go to the monthly charts. And you really, and notice how these support and resistance lines, based upon the longer term, long and short term, look how they automatically redraw quickly, because the math is the same, but you can get a much different perspective on these stocks or ETFs, whatever you're trading, by using the weekly and monthly and the daily. So here's the daily, and look at the weekly. I mean, look at the difference, a totally different perspective. And this line here on the daily, when I go to the weekly, it extends clear back to this point right here. And then these are the support and resistance areas for the weekly chart. Now on the daily chart, and you've heard me say this 100 times, I always like to add the group line because it's so important. I'm going to edit this. I'll just go up here and edit the view, and I'm going to add an indicator. For those of you who are new, this is the way you put the group in here. I just typed in group, and you double click to get the group index. First thing you have to do is you have to use a private scale, because we do not want to scale the group to these numbers over here that are represented by this stock. And what I want to do here is use the dotted line, and I'll just use black for my color. I always use the dotted line. I usually use a dark gray, but for this presentation, I'm going to use the black line. And I have to select the industry group index. If I use the current group index, if a stock is in its own group that you've made up, a manufactured group, it would use the current group index. But I always, for the most part, I should say, want the industry group index. Now let's add this, and you can see that the group that Apple was in, that Apple's actually underperforming it. How do we know that? Because the group turned up here, Apple went along with it, but then it stalled out compared to the direction. I just look at the direction of the line, and you can see that that slope compared to this slope is much different. Okay. Now let's go look at a few other stocks. I did, let's go into the designer. And I did an end-of-day update with the intraday data. Let's just go in and let's look at what's in the best of Woodward and Brown. I haven't looked at these. I don't know what they look like. But this is, and now let's go to a weekly on this chart. This is Altria Group. I would never buy it because it's a tobacco company. But you can see, looking at the weekly chart, that the longer term, and let me bring this back up, the color, and I'll put a crosshair on here. So you can see all of the longer term and shorter term support and resistance colors and numbers here. And it has broken out, it looks like, on this weekly chart to an all-time high. Let's look at a monthly chart. This stock is now trading at an all-time high. I guess I should have bought it and not boycotted it because it's a tobacco company. But look how tight this thing is on a monthly chart. But I just want you to get into the habit of looking at charts from a different perspective. I want you to look at the daily, I want you to look at the weekly, and I want you to look at the monthly charts. And you can put all three of them up at once if you want to, but I stay away from that. Now, another thing, by looking at this, all of our calculations on the VPA are done according to the daily charts, and the daily calculations, I should say. But that does not mean that these signals, there I use the word signals. These alerts are not available on the other charts. They are. Here is a monthly test for supply in an uptrend, a sign of strength on a monthly chart. Here's an effort to rise back here. This one back here was an up thrust bar, and it took several months for it to recover from that. And then when it did recover, it shot up there. But look at all these flags back here showing support in this stock. Now let me go back to the daily. You can see how much of a difference there is between the daily and the monthly. It just gives you a totally different perspective. Let's see what the next stock is. Now here's Broadcom Limited. I'll make this full screen here. Now notice how Broadcom trades with its group. Group's up, group's up. It's kind of stalling here. The group's down, the stock's down. Group's going up, Broadcom's going up. Okay? This is why the group line is so important, and you'll find the group line in most of my charts. Now let's look at a weekly of this. It's really loose in the daily chart. It's pretty loose in the weekly chart. You can see the range of this. This was down to 96, trading up to around 150, and notice that this resistance line here, if you put a crosshair on it, it will extend back here also. Now let's look at it on a monthly chart. Now on a monthly chart, you get a totally different perspective. Why are there no VPA signals on here? Because you need 120 periods for the signals to be generated. If I go back to a weekly chart, notice that there are multiple flags on here. But as I said before, these flags are generated on any time frame that you choose, and if you have enough data, they will be there. Okay, here's Campbell's Soup. This is a daily chart, and you can see that it's been very tight. This is one of those defensive stocks that has held up extremely well during this time period. It's almost at a 52-week high. I'm going to put a monthly on. You can see that there's enough data here on the monthly to generate the VPA signals. So this list is the best of Woodward and Brown. And what the best of Woodward and Brown is, it just takes the stocks that appear most often today in the Woodward and Brown smart groups, and it just pulls out the top 10. That's all it is. It doesn't mean you should go out and buy them tomorrow, but it does mean that these stocks are appearing in multiple smart groups, and consequently they're generally pretty decent stocks. Now here's Energy Recovery. I noticed this the other day. This was coming up in the top 50 group inclusion report on this day, on this effort to rise, and look at it, it's following through. Let's look at a weekly. Well, something's big happened here, but I don't want to spend time on that. I'll just look at a couple more and we'll call it good here because we'll answer questions. Here's NextEra Energy. This is a daily chart. Notice how this trend line, it's trading between support and resistance right here. It's trying to break out to an all-time new high. I think it's an all-time new high. That's a weekly, and that's a monthly. Yes, it is trying to break out to an all-time new high, so you know exactly where your resistance is here, and you know where the support is here. So that's an expensive stock, okay? And so on and so forth. I don't want to spend more time doing that. I think we should get into some questions. We've been talking for 53.5 minutes. So does anybody have any questions about this? Boy, we must have really had good explanations there.
Yeah, or they're just all confused.
Well, why don't we take a look at some of the questions that were, how do you get multiple screens up? Let's see if I can remember how to do this. If I have this set up, new HGS charting window right here. So you can bring that, wow, this is it doesn't come up to the same chart. This is a chart I've been messing with. But you can choose multiple charts, and then you can position them on your window. You're welcome. Thanks for listening. We have some questions that came in on the spreadsheet. If the people are here that ask those questions, I'll try to answer some of them. Let me bring my spreadsheet up and over here in this other window. Okay.
Yes, you can sync the multiple charts to the same symbol. There's a checkbox.
Yeah,
so
is that,
yeah, it's
it's on the warehouse, isn't it?
No, there's a way of, if you have more than one chart window, you can have them all look at the same symbol.
Right, right here.
Link multiple chart windows. And so if you check that box, whenever you change the symbol in one chart window, it'll change in all your chart windows. So you can have multiple chart windows all with different views, but looking at the same stock.
And I'll do that some other time. It takes a little while to get it set up just properly, but yes, you can do it. Well, some people have to leave on these.
Yeah, well, they'll get recordings, but
Sure.
there were some questions that we could go over, some EPS, find EPS things I remember.
Okay, here's one. We should have screens for value and defensive stocks. There are screens in here in the smart groups.
There are several smart groups that are in that way.
Especially in the Woodward and Brown here, we let's see, what do we have here? We have a high profit margin. If you're looking for something like that, this quarterly earnings per share acceleration finds fast-growing stocks. If you want to just stick to stocks with earnings, I would go up here under the box stocks. All of these stocks, 531 of them have consistent earnings growth. So I don't, those are not necessarily value stocks, but they are stocks with earnings growth, and you could limit yourself just to that universe if you don't want to mess with stocks other than those that are showing earnings growth. Let's see, do I have I don't think I have a value in here anymore at, here's growth. But, you know, we can set up filters to do anything you want to do. And, you know, that would be another session rather than getting into that now.
So to answer this one question, when you transition from daily to weekly charts, are the lines drawn in the same high or low? That is, are the percent retracements the same amount? The percent, the zigzag is computed against the weekly chart or the monthly or yearly or whatever the time period. And so the percent change, it's still the same percentage, but it'll have to be against the weekly data or the monthly data. And so the weekly value has to change 6% or 2% or whatever the percentage you were using in order for an inflection point to be signaled. And so the longer time periods will produce a completely different set of support and resistance lines. They recompute in the weekly and monthly versions against the weekly and monthly chart and aren't the same points that you would have seen in the daily. There's also a lot of the VPA indicator guide from last week is already in the online help So if you bring up the help and go to the VPA indicator, there's an extensive amount of help already, but we will make that PDF available. It's not on the website right now, though. No. Are the default support and resistance charts not sufficient without modifying them? Well, I think Ron has a bunch of nice views already in the current add-on. I believe they're perfectly adequate, but I also think with the support and resistance, you may want to tune the values to the kind of trading you're looking to do. You know, for a shorter-term trader, a 2% is a resistance and support moment, whereas a longer-term 6 may not even be enough. You may want to see the stock pivot 10% or more. It depends on your kind of trading. You may want to tweak to make a copy of the view and tweak those values to the kind of trade you're looking for. Or, you could just go with what's there and, understand why that line is a support and resistance and then adjust for it, mentally. Because it is a real pivot point, but if your trading style is a longer term period, you're probably not going to want to use these really short support and resistance moments.
This is a weekly and this is a daily side by side here, and with the support and resistance redrawing according to the time period. So this would be the weekly and this would be the daily. And these two are pretty comparable right here, but they're going to differ because it's period based. But if you're trading the longer term, just stick to weekly charts, and it'll give you a good idea of what's where support and resistance is for that time period. Any other questions? No, Paul. The default. I think Matt answered this. The default support and resistance. What's default now is what is default, Matt? 5 and
5 lines and 6%, which means you get 10 support and resistance lines at 6%. It's the defaults from the Amy Broker indicator we converted over, and I don't think they're great defaults, but I assumed when you're saying default support and resistance charts, he was referring more to the views that we're sending out, your collection of views.
Okay.
Those, yes.
Okay.
And I assume those, I think, are more than adequate. In fact, I think there's way too many.
Well, there are. I was just putting them out there. And when I send my next VPA update, I'll probably eliminate a lot of them, and I just had to get some things out there for the customers.
And to see how this works. These indicators, we only added them last October, so we're still learning how to adjust these to be very usable. And there's a lot of combinations that you can use these on that aren't obvious. Like one other possibility is you can create another inner window, put another copy of the price, and then stick a different set of support and resistance lines, so you don't get as many overlapping lines on one chart. There's a lot of ways, or you could do multiple windows and sync the symbols. There are a lot of ways you can use this to visualize support and resistance moments that you kind of got to think about.
Yeah. One thing that I've been using, and this is a third-party thing, you may not want to, let's see if I can find it here quickly. If I can find it, here it is. It's called Max2. And what you can do is you can set up your windows so it breaks your screen up into predefined areas, which will always be there until you turn it off. I only turn it on occasionally when I'm looking at multiple charts and so on. I can't remember what I paid for this. It wasn't very much. but you can set up different screens or different areas. Let me just see if I can do this quickly. But for those of you who want to put multiple charts up, it would be a nice addition to your toolkit. Okay, highlight regions. So right here, you can see that I have 2 vertical areas right here. And if I did this correctly, you can see that that went into that. Maybe I'm not doing this correctly. I think they both went into the same area. Okay, so I just clicked here and you can see that it splits the screen up into 2 areas. But I also have some layouts where there's 2 charts stacked here and another chart stacked over here, and then I can have the warehouse up here. And like Matt said, you can have 3 different types of charts. You can, I'm not going to do it here because I don't have the time, but you could have a VPA chart, you could have a float control, float volume turnover chart, and you could have a volume at price chart, and they would all be linked to the same signal. And then with the warehouse or the designer over here, you can flip through them very quickly and look at a lot of charts, a lot of stocks or ETFs with multiple charts. It's very powerful and very handy. We'll do that sometime. Okay, Max 2 costs $19 according to Bradley. Thank you. I thought it was around there. Bradley, are you using it? Yeah, it's a nice piece of software. Okay, it's Max 2, John. M-A-X-T-O. Just do, it's all one word. Just do a search for it. And then when I'm done with it, I just come in here and I right mouse click and I exit it because I don't want it resizing everything all the time. But for $19, it's very nice. Anything else we can answer? Yeah, I turn it off too, Bradley. I just use it only with HGSI.
Okay, I think we probably have covered everything. And if there was something we didn't go into details on, you know, you can always send us email, and we will answer questions that way. You don't have to wait for a seminar to get an answer.
Yeah.
We will reply. And I think a few of the things that were on the sign up we'll probably answer by email.
Yeah.
Some of those questions.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for sticking it out, everybody, and watching. See you next time.